This is where I spent the end of my high school years. I had a hard time in school. I transferred 10 times to 8 different schools before my senior year. For that, there were a ton of reasons, but I remember sitting in an English class in school number 7 on transfer number 9 when my teacher, Miss Woods, placed a copy of the Laramie Project on my desk. I was young. It was my first semester of sophomore year. I was just barely 15 years old and only halfway out of the closet. I had never heard of Matthew Shepard, and the story isn't really about him. However, it was his story that changed my life. It was jarring to hear about his life and untimely death. I was struggling, and to learn about the hate people like me face just for a living sent me down a path of articles, books, movies about people, just like me, losing their lives far too soon. One story that stuck with me more than any other was that of Bobby Griffith. I clung on to that story. I still do. Bobby and I are the same age as he was when he died at 20 years old in 1983. He jumped in front of the tractor trailer on the 405 in Portland, Oregon, with a $2 bill and 77 cents in his pocket. I find myself wondering what combination of coins made up those 77 cents. I had never searched for why I felt so connected to Bobby, but now I think it's because we grew up in the same neighborhood. This is Walnut Creek. Once known for walnut orchards, now known for being expensive with a median house price of $1.1 million, me and Bobby Griffith both walked these streets, though I'm sure it looks very different now than it did then. His family raised him in this Presbyterian church. He kept a journal, filled with his deepest fears and regrets, and a sentiment seen in almost every entry is a fear of a wrathful God sentencing him to hell. I don't want to pretend I know what he was feeling, but I can use my own experiences to guess, try and understand, but I'm sure what was written down was only a fraction of what he was feeling on a day-to-day basis. I grew up in the Catholic Church, though it's been years since I went to a service. I had work off for Easter, and I figured what better day to re-embark in the church than on the day of resurrection. I arrived early in fasting, about 8:45. I made my way to what the map listed as the sanctuary. When I was growing up in the Catholic Church, we arrived early, in our Sunday best, fasting in preparation for the receiving of communion. I was concerned if I didn't get there early, I wouldn't have a spot to sit. There is also a notion in my mind of respect. If you have an appointment with God, you want to be on time. I've done my best to leave these notions behind, but returning to a house of the Lord returned all of this in force. I arrived early, to a church almost empty, and sat down in the 5th pew back. I tried my best to relax, but couldn't help but feel I had just arrived at the dentist. I was fidgeting. I grabbed a Bible out of the pew in front of me and flipped to a random page. I was greeted with Isaiah 27. On that day, the Lord will take his sharp and great and mighty sword and bring judgment on Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the coiling serpent, and he will slay the dragon of the sea. I looked up and the ceiling had a skylight, just like the church I grew up in. I couldn't help but think of Bobby. I wondered if Bobby ever sat here, looking up as I was now, thinking of the judgment we are sentenced to. As time passed, people filtered in. I was still by myself in the pew, feeling more than a little underdressed. I had grass stuck to my dress shoes, and I was wearing black jeans instead of dress pants. Up on the stage was a man with an electric guitar and an iPad on his music stand, and the sermon started. I was reminded of my grandmother. She always had snacks and aspirin and tissues in her purse. It was now that I wished I had one of those tissues. The big screen up front followed along with the lyrics to the song being played. It comes from Revelation 5:12. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain, to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. When the song wrapped up, the pastor, Bart Garrett, took the mic. He was charismatic, trying to be cool, talking about TikTok and making jokes about Jesus having risen, spelled R-I-Z-Z-E-N. He invited us to greet our neighbors, just as a family of 4 asked to join me in the pew. I said yes, and extended my hand with the Catholic "Peace be with you" on the tip of my tongue, when she introduced herself with her name. I introduced myself and turned behind me. Another "Peace be with you" met a man named Dale, handlebar mustache, calling me young fellow, and telling me he had a grandson who shared the same name as me. The sermon continued to talk about the crucifixion and subsequent resurrection of Jesus. The pastor explained how the return of Jesus back into his mortal and human body would not have been a resurrection or a reincarnation, but a reincarceration. We see in Romans 6-8 the comparison of the body to sin. By shedding of this body, Jesus was set free, set towards divinity. For Bobby as well, this life was without a doubt an incarceration. He was being held captive by himself, the church, the environment he grew up in. He couldn't see a way out but to rid himself of the body that connected him to this existence. The end for Bobby came early. He was only 20. He did the best he could to shed himself of the sin that came with being a young gay man in the early 80s. 12 minutes away from the high school I learned of Matthew Shepardin, he left his just 2 months before graduation, after he was outed and an unsuccessful suicide attempt. He moved to Portland, in with his cousin, and did the best he could to escape the self-hatred that came from a house where his mother plastered Bible verses on the bathroom mirror. He didn't find any support at home. He didn't know where to turn. The church was no light of safety, nor his friends and family. He found a brief, flickering light of hope in Oregon, but ultimately, that light was extinguished along with him. Halfway through the writing of this film, I found out that the church had been burned to the ground in 1985, 2 years after Bobby's death. The sanctuary I sit in today, staring up at the skylight, is not the one Bobby sat in. Walnut Creek Pres has made leaps and bounds of change since 1983. There are still improvements to be made, wounds to heal, and love to spread, but they have grown. I found myself struggling with how to wrap this up. I think I know now, it isn't about a conclusion. There is no solution. A grave wrongdoing has been done, is being done, will continue to be done by the church. However, they have grown. They have improved. There are people fighting for this. The pastors, Bart and Tommy, strive to make this church feel welcoming. They try to give a light of safety to the Bobbies in their community that they can reach now. This collection of people welcomed me with open arms and gave me space to explore. Is the burning enough? The building, the pastor, the mantra of God hates fags is gone. Not everywhere, but here. This doesn't undo the pain. This does not bring Bobby back. This doesn't fix the church, but it does give me pause, in a place where I didn't think I'd find it.